The following episode is of a sensitive nature. Viewer discretion is advised.
Today's episode is sponsored by newspapers.com, your go-to resource for unlocking the stories of your ancestors. Dive into the newspapers where your family's history unfolds as you search nearly 1 billion pages in seconds. Newspapers.com offers an unparalleled treasure trove of historical newspapers, providing a window into the past. With papers from the 17th century to today, newspapers.com is the largest online newspaper archive. Use promo code Genealogy Adventures for a 20% discount on your subscription. That's Genealogy Adventures at newspapers.com. Sign up today at newspapers.com and embark on a journey of discovery.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Genealogy Adventures. I'm Brian Sheffy.
And I'm Donya Williams. We have such the show for you guys today. So I'm just going to jump right in it. I'm going to just get it done. And we're just going to start talking. So today we have three of some of the most smartest people on the face of this earth, as far as I'm concerned. Rick Murphy, Bertha French, and Dr. Evelyn McDowell. I want you guys to welcome all three. Rick Murphy is an educator, historian, and author, documentarian, and lecturer. He currently serves as the President General of Families of English America. His award-winning book, The Arrival of the First Americans in Virginia, was turned into a documentary with the same my eyes hurting, with the same name as and has won over 20 international film awards, including being selected as Best Director. His family lineage dates to the earliest colonial periods of Plymouth, Massachusetts, and of Jamestown, Virginia. Mr. Murphy's lineage has been evaluated and accepted by several hereditary societies, including the DAR, the National Sons of Colonial New England, Sons of American Revolution, Union Veterans, and more, as well as the Sons and Daughters of U.S. Middle Passage. Can't forget that. Mr. Murphy is he was a resident at Harvard University, Kennedy School of Government, Masters in Urban Affairs from Boston University, and a Bachelor's of Science degree at the University of Massachusetts. Bertha French is a descendant from enslaved communities in Virginia, Kentucky, South Carolina, and Florida. Her connection to family history stems from an ironclad oral tradition linking her to communities across generations and geographies. She is proud to be one of the co-founders and current board vice president of the Descendants of Enslaved Communities at the University of Virginia, founded in 2020. It's a nonprofit organization that research and reclaim and honor the more than 4,000 enslaved people who seeded, built, and sustained the University of Virginia. In addition to work at DSC, she works as a senior research consultant with the World Health Organization in gender-based violence and trauma-informed health system responses. She served on several nonprofit boards, global grant-making programs for social impact funds, and investing in Indigenous women's funds. She holds a master's in public health from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and a bachelor's from the University of Virginia. Dr. Evelyn McDowell currently serves as founder and chairperson of the board of directors of Sons and Daughters of the United States Middle Passage, a lineage society for descendants of Africans enslaved in colonial America and the United States of America. The organization was founded in 2011 and is the first such organization explicitly created as a national lineage society, requiring members to prove lineage to join. She's also a member of the Princeton chapter of the DAR. Dr. McDowell is the chair and associate professor of accountancy at Rider University and co-chair of Rider's History of Slavery Task Force. She is a genealogist and spends many hours honing her skills. She's been researching for her family tree for over 25 years and has helped many others to do the same. She's a public speaker, outspoken advocate for the inclusion of African Americans throughout all pages of American history. She is a published author who writes about using lineage as basis for reparative justice for slavery and the history of slavery in New Jersey. Didn't I tell y'all we had like the smartest people in the world on this show today? When I tell you we have that, we have that. Welcome, guys.
Welcome, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Yes. So we're gonna jump right into this because when I tell y'all, I just kind of started sharing stuff really, 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 really early on. I did because I want to be a part of this from the very beginning. But I know Brian wanted to start things off with you, Evelyn. So I'm gonna let him do his first question because you wrote this whole paragraph in the book, and I'll make sure I'm not going to do that move that you said, Rick. Um, in a chapter in the book called "The Black Reparations," and she just really kind of outlines a lot of stuff in it. So go ahead, Brian, ask your questions.
Okay. Little preface for the benefit of the audience because the subject of reparations is huge. Um, it basically covers basically African descended people in the whole Western Atlantic world. There's no way that we could even begin to cover that in one episode in an hour. We are specifically talking about reparations for descendants of enslaved people in the United States. That doesn't even cover the colonial period for the United States. So I just wanted to be very kind of clear about what we are and aren't going to be discussing. And I guess the perfect reason why it's so focused, Dr. Dr. Evelyn actually wrote about it. Um, Evelyn, if you'd like to, for the benefit of the audience, talk about that paragraph that Donnie is speaking about, where you so eloquently contextualized uh, reparations.
Okay, I'll be happy to. First of all, I want to say thank you for having us on this panel. This is a very, very important topic, very timely topic. Um, I wrote actually a chapter in this book regarding the Black Reparations Project. It was edited by William Darity and Kirsten Mullen, and also edited by Lucas Hubbard. And you can get that at Amazon. But it's a great book, and I just want to just mention it because what they've done is they put all these chapters together and from different authors who wrote about this, our claim for reparations. And so my particular chapter was about how to find that enslaved ancestor and connect that enslaved ancestor, or connect yourself to that enslaved ancestor. It details about all the evidence. It helps people who have never done this work before, kind of acclimates them to the different all the evidence that you can use to help connect yourself to that enslaved person. It also helps them. It gives you. I have a case study in there, and actually two case studies. One from someone who was born in the North, and another person, an enslaved ancestor who was born in the South. And it tells you, that you don't really need the basic premise is you don't really need to find a bill of sale, or you don't need to find a will. You don't need to find, some of these documents that people, that are difficult to connect someone to. We hear all the time, "Oh, it's too hard. You can't do it. It's too long ago." But what in this chapter I show that is a complete myth. It's absolutely doable, and you can find your enslaved ancestor and connect yourself to them. So that's what the chapter is about, and I'll be more than happy to take some questions. But really, we're talking about, like you said, Brian, about this book actually starts with the fact that we were promised 40 acres and a mule,
Mm.
and it starts from that point to make the case for reparations. I also want to plug another book if anybody is really interested in this topic, you want to read this book called From Here to Equality, also written by William Darity, Dr. William Darity Jr. and A. Kirsten Mullen. It's a fabulous book that really lays out this case for why reparations is needed. And I can talk more about some of the chapters and as we go on. So I want to make sure I give time for our other panelists.
Okay. And Rick, in terms of the period that we're discussing, again, it's the beginning of the American Republic, as we know it, the United States Republic. There's a bit of argument historically about when that actually occurred, but for you, what would be the start date for reparations?
Well, I think, like Evelyn said, thank you both for inviting me once again. It's always an honor to be here. And unfortunately, these hour sessions end too fast, and I'm always caught off guard because I'm still talking. But I would start it at 1705 slave codes. And when you hear European Americans say that they had nothing to do with slavery, and oftentimes, if they can't define a problem, they put it off to something else. But the 1705 slave codes explicitly took specific actions to deny access and legal rights to Americans of African descent. It was very clear what they did. Those 1705 slave codes denied the right to education, denied the right to employment, denied the right of land and ownership, even denied the right to your own children. The 1705 slave codes explicitly made us a matriarchal society wherein the child automatically took the legal status of the enslaved mother for perpetuity. So there's no question it should start at the beginning of those very laws that denied us access. Those 1705 slave codes were turned into the antebellum period, turned into the Jim Crow, and we still see those same laws today. And it's understandable why people don't want us to read about history or want our children to know about history, because if we knew about our history, it makes a clearer and a definable argument for reparations. And I'm 100% behind reparations.
Now, before I get to you, Bertha, just a quick question for Rick. So I believe in that 1705 date as well. But for me, that would mean I would want to sue Britain for reparations because our country didn't exist at that point.
I'm sorry, Brian, you broke up a bit. Can you ask the question again?
I agree about that 1705 start date because of that law. But for me, that would mean suing the British government because our country, as we know it, the Republic, didn't exist at that point. But you are right. That 1705 year is a very important year.
Well, certainly we can do that. But the broader point is that those 1705 slave codes was the foundational period for our United States Constitution. And that's when this government started through the Declaration of Independence and then the writing of the Constitution, which to a large degree was founded on those 1705 slave codes. So we don't have to go back as far as England. We can go from the very beginning of the foundation of this country. And as the Supreme Court enacted or defined and redefined and interpreted laws, it goes back to those 1705 slave codes. When we look at what took place during the Jim Crow era, it goes back to those 1705 slave codes. And even today, when they talk about many different laws that they want to act and reenact, go back to those 1705 slave codes. So we don't have to go that far, although many of the corporations that were founded came out of that era. They certainly came out of the era after the Constitution and during the Civil War.
Mm-hmm. Donia, did you have a question?
No, I'm just reading and studying. Thank you very much. I'm waiting. I want to hear Bertha's response as well. Like I said, I'm amongst just some brainiacs right now, so I need to suck it in.
So Bertha, for you, who would be the who and the when in regards to reparations?
So I'm trying to heed to the way you framed this discussion to not go beyond the borders of the United States. And not discuss some of the other colonial powers. I know that Great Britain is an important player, but I would go even beyond or earlier than 1705, and look at some of the other structures that were in place, European powers that were involved in enslavement. Being seated here in Florida, I cannot but acknowledge the role that the Spanish had in enslaving our ancestors, as well as the French kind of going along the Gulf Coast. Um, but for sure, just acknowledging the wars that were happening in the colonial powers or amongst the colonial powers at that time, our ancestors were very much a part of that chess game that was being played, and the pawns that we were in terms of building wealth and strength and the power behind those colonial powers. So I would say, just in direct response to that, not as a sort of counter to what he's saying, but I would say it's a both and type situation.
And can I jump? I'm going to jump in. The reason why the group that I'm a part of, the reason why we focused in on right after the end of the Civil War is because of the actual special order that was laid out the claim. I mean, there it is. We were given this promise. We were given this promise of land, and so just as a legal basis, because absolutely what Rick is saying and what Bertha's saying, absolutely right. We can go back into the 1500s and make the case for why reparations is necessary, but there is a legal precedent or a legal framework that started back when Sherman issued that order. That's why we're kind of starting there. So I just want to be clear.
And Brian, if I can jump in, I'm not as quick as I used to be, but before you ask a question, I can go on. And I'm a firm believer, if they can't control us, they want to define us. If they can't control the conversation, they want to define the conversation. This is not a conversation about Great Britain, and I think we need to be clear about that. As you know, historians have always said slavery was a peculiar institution to this nation here. In 1742, the Mansfield decision clearly stated in England that there was no foundation for enslavement. The 1705 slave codes specifically were written by the Virginia burgesses to define the institution in this country. So I don't want those who want to say, well, gee, they just said that this isn't our fault, it's Great Britain's fault. It's a peculiar institution to this nation based on the 1705 slave codes, where the burgesses of Virginia specifically, explicitly came up with laws to define us as chattel property.
Okay. Well, I have to say that MSNBC last week, they have an amazing podcast on reparations. It's really, really interesting. I will try to find the link and try to post that today. But in and amongst the stories in the history they were talking about, they discussed that former enslavers at the end of the Civil War could file for compensation for the loss of their enslaved people, and enslavers did get paid out. I can't remember the total amount that the federal government did pay out to them, but it was a significant amount of money. Interestingly, one of the people that they documented receiving that payment was a Black man. And he had purchased his wife, his slave wife, his children, I believe a sister, and another one of his family members. He was in the process of freeing them when the Civil War started, never was able to complete it because of the war. And at the end, he got the brainstorm. Well, technically, these people are still my slaves, so I could file a compensation claim, which he did, and he got paid. He got paid money. He divvied that money out amongst his sister and his kids. And then part of the podcast go on to show that because he got that money and he gave it to his kids and his family members, they became a family of doctors, lawyers, educators. They took that money there, they bought land, they became property owners, and kind of started up that ladder of what we would consider to be white European American success. They became a success story. Because the premise of the MSNBC podcast is what would have happened if all of the freed enslaved people got the 40 acres and a mule that Donnie had spoken about. And I had mentioned all of that long kind of bit about that particular podcast. I kind of got into it with someone on X. I know, shock, hard, discussing reparations and getting into an argument on X. But someone said, well, we gave you, America gave you all your reparations. Y'all are on welfare. And to point into Rick's, yes, someone said that to me. And I responded in a similar way to Rick just responded. I was like, if we had gotten 40 acres and a mule, that would have given us independence. Welfare makes us dependent. It's like you couldn't get further away from that argument if you tried. And I was like, and at the end of the day, welfare is not reparations, and your white Caucasian Americans actually file welfare claims more than anyone else. So there's that.
Well, Brian, if I might, and I didn't mean to cut you off at the end, and again, you will hear me repeatedly say, if they can't control the conversation, they want to define it. I think that was an excellent example that MSBC demonstrated an American of African descent who was able to benefit from reparations. But we got to be careful that the conversation doesn't become even black people got reparations, but using him as an example. So we got to be very, very careful. He was an isolated case out of thousands and thousands of enslavers over the history of this country. And I want to go back to the 1705 slave codes, because even in the 1705 slave codes, they made provisions for the white enslavers to be paid if injury, harm, or death came to their enslaved individuals. So it goes back to the very founding of the laws that enslaved us as chattel property. And that's like, there are those who quick to say, well, gee, it was the Africans who sold other Africans into slavery. And that helps them to define the conversation on their behalf. We have to be very, very careful that we don't overemphasize the discussion of that one individual who was able to find a loophole and was able to enrich his family from the money that he received. He was one of over 40 million enslaved people. So we got to be careful of that, because I don't want anyone to use it as a description and the definition of what reparations was about. So we got to be careful of that. I attended a session yesterday, and this is Black History Month, and I speak before Black groups and white groups. And, well, gee, it was the Africans that were the ones that sold us. So they cherry pick what they want to hear. If they can't control the discussion, they want to define the discussion. We're going to be very, very careful of that this one individual, this isolated individual, doesn't become the discussion around reparations, and we put it right back where it belongs, that we were treated as enslaved property, and as a result of that, we do not have the same inherited or legacy rights that those who were the enslavers and or the beneficiaries of the enslaved, whether their ancestors were here or not.
Well, I'm going to bring Donnie in on this one, because I relayed that to Donnie when we spoke, and she pointed something interesting out in terms of this particular person who got reparations because he enslaved people. Did you want to share your thoughts, Donnie?
Oh, I thought you was getting ready to say something else. As far as that, yeah, I'm sorry. So no, as far as the enslaved people, one of the things that I have a question about, and what really kind of to me.
Oh, can I? Well, if you're not going to say it, can I? Because that's now been left unanswered. Can I just say what you said? How you responded to that?
Okay, which one you talking about, Brian? Because we said a lot.
The black enslaver who got compensation for his
the
wife,
black enslaver who got compensation. You're talking about the fact that he should receive reparations?
Yes,
that's what I was getting ready to say. So and that's what we were getting into. I mean, my whole thing about this kind of stuff is that now that we're moving forward into who should get reparations, and how Dr. Evelyn just gave us a whole blueprint in this book that I showed you guys. Would this person be able to receive reparations at this point later on down the line? Like, now we're here. We're in 2024. His family received reparations. His family got stuff because of him being an enslaver. Not because they were enslaved, but because of him being an enslaver. Would they still be eligible for reparations? Would that be fair? At Because in one way, I'm like, well, okay, no, it's not fair. But in another sense, I'm like, well, yeah, they should. So I think I'm leaning towards more so that they shouldn't. But nevertheless, I would love to hear you guys, thoughts on that.
I'm going to jump in and say something. So, I think Rick makes a really, really good point. We don't want to focus on this very, very unique situation. There were 4 million people enslaved, and so we don't want to spend a whole lot of time on that. I would say that when we think about when I think about people who should get compensation, would be the people who are descendant of enslaved people. I mean, just to look at that case in particular, maybe that man, he's come from a long line of enslaved people. And many of us do. I'm up to 37 enslaved people in just me, and I could go even further if I, have the time, I can go back. But the people who have enslaved people in their lineage are the people who should get reparations. One of the hallmarks of reparation, in my opinion, is the wealth. It's the black white wealth gap. It's humongous. It will never be closed because because of our legacy and what happened to our ancestors. They worked for centuries and never got a dime. And I think about, like if my ancestors had gotten what, just a little bit, even the 40 acres and a mule is not a payment enough for what our ancestors went through. However, if they got some compensation, we're talking about Rockefellers. I tell people this all the time. We're talking about Rockefellers. Got to make sure I'm not talking about the rap group. Um, and so we talk about these rich Vanderbilts. There could have been some Colberts, which is my family line. We could have had some Andersons. But our ancestors were never given that. So when I talk about reparations, I'm talking about any descendant of enslaved people.
I agree with Evelyn 100%. And this is a trick bag to those of you from New York are very familiar with three-card Monte. And I put the little nut under this one here, and I'm moving it around and moving it around, so you all aren't really paying attention. And it's a trick bag to get us to talk about who should and who shouldn't get it. The moment our ancestors were put on those enslaved ships, that's the ticket that we should be talking about. And whether someone descends from someone who was freed, or enslaved, or 97% enslaved, or 20% freed, that's what they want us to do is get, if you're light skin or dark skin, they want us all these different things to get us talking about. The reality is our ancestors and we today did not benefit from the riches of this nation. There were laws in place when we could not own land, but European peasants came over on ships and were given acres and acres of land in the Midwest under the Homestead Program. There were programs that were specifically denied our ancestors access. And we look at our young people today and we understand that the educational systems failed them, the legal systems failed them, the familiar system has failed them. Our community has failed generation after generation, but then they want us to talk about, well, if you're light skinned, you get this, or if you're uneducated, you get that, or if you can prove your ancestors were enslaved, it's a trick bag. If they can't control the conversation, then they want to control what we're talking about. We need to be clear on reparations. We don't want to get into all that stuff because it's a sideshow. That's exactly what it is. Reparations for how the country was institutionalized, how the wealth was built, and how we were denied to that access in our ancestors going back, present, and in the future unless something happens.
I'm going to say this really quickly based on what Rick just said, and I'm going to bring you in, Bertha. And again, does reparations stop at slavery? Should there be an argument that really we never got an equal break? There was Jim Crow, and there was just segregation. There was just all that ritualized trauma and humiliation that carried on up to the present day. I can't even say that it's over. It's carried on up to the present day. But the genesis of it does go back to back to that enslavement period. And again, I'm going to say for the free people of color, that's going to be a whole other conversation, because even though they were free, they weren't white free. They weren't equal free. They had challenges and pressures and trauma all their own.
Right. I mean, just to echo what you're saying, Brian, I mean, I for sure see, and what Rick has mentioned is looking at the race wealth gap as a basis for understanding, what reparations should look like. But the who is an important aspect of that. That, in 1865, yes, technically we were free, but we have still suffered from, displacement, dispossession, and in its newest and rare and reiterated form. And that has affected our ability to build wealth intergenerationally. And I might add that it's important to understand the effects of trauma on our ability to continue to build our lives, which I think is a really important aspect of this conversation about reparations. Is yes, there is an economic bit of it, but what are the pathways for building trauma-informed systems that lead us to really reconciling our past? Certainly, those institutions, President Lincoln came up with very clear, in the District of Columbia, for example, in the Act for the Release of Certain Persons Held in Service or Labor in the District of Columbia, giving former slave owners $300 per enslaved person that they set free. There's a specific formula that's associated with that. And we see that over and over and over. Examples, not just in the United States. And I'm sorry, Brian, I'm bringing this up. You look in Great Britain, you look in other countries, Amsterdam. To this day, the descendants of the enslaver families are still paid reparations for the fact that they have lost income for having freed their slaves. So just reinforcing what you said. I don't know if that's any adding any value to the conversation, but for sure, looking at the dollar amount, it's not a mystery how those families were given reparations. There should be no confusion about how we would be able to come up with a way to calculate our income lost or reparative action to benefit.
And if I can follow up on that for a second, and Brian, go back to the question that we asked before the question. Not sure if it's still going on today. Let me first say that any reparations that we or our descendants may receive today or in the future is only going to be a small decimal point on the global national budget of America. So while the number may be large, it's going to be very small in terms of totality of things. And is this still going on today? Well, when you get somebody who's trying to offer kids 400 gold sneakers, there's a meaning behind that, which clearly demonstrates that the enslavement of our minds and our bodies are still very similar as they were back during slavery period. And although we are free according to the law, we're not free in the minds of a lot of different people. So that's why we got to be careful when we talk about reparations and not get caught in all these sidebar issues, because until our kids are equal to those who have privilege, we are still enslaved in many other ways other than being in legal bondage, social bondage, and educational bondage, and economic bondage.
I want to jump in real quick for some audio stuff. We are still having certain audio difficulties on Genealogy Adventures, so some of your comments are not popping up. I want to apologize if you don't see them, but they are not popping up, so I do apologize in advance. I also wanted to kind of jump in on this because I want us to move forward because the time is going fast. And I wanted to actually ask you guys, so let's say we've gotten to the point where we established who is to receive the reparations. Let's say we've established it, we've gone past all these things because this can go back and forth for a while. Um, but let's say we've established it. How do we give it out? What are the best ways? What are the best reasons? What are the best ways to give it out? What exactly is reparations when we're at the point that we can now hand it over? They can now give it out. If I'm the government, what am I giving? Am I giving land? Am I giving money? Am I giving education, free education? What exactly am I giving? Am I going backwards for some other stuff? Like, what am I giving them?
Can I jump in on that one?
Yes.
So I want to go back just a little second. I just wanted to say, we also think that the people who should get reparation are people who identify as as black or African American. So it is possible, of course, that someone who identifies as white has been always listed themselves as white, and then now it's time for reparations, and you know my great five times
Mhm.
7 8 times great grandparent was enslaved, and now they want reparations. We say that person should not get it. So that is one point. And then I want to go back to to what you're saying now, is that your question. um you know I think it should be direct payments. I know right now, California went through their reparation discussion, and they've got bills now. They have a 14 bills that they're going to be presenting to their legislature for reparations, and cash payments is not one of them. So a lot of people are upset about that, and I think they should be, because cash direct payments, those payments were taken from our ancestors, and so we want direct payments back. I said early on that a big reason why there is a need for reparations, not only to I mean, it is about repair, right? We want to repair this group of people who suffered in ways nobody on this planet. I know you can't find a group of people who were treated so horribly than how our ancestors were treated in this country. And then not only after the end of slavery, it just kept going. So
Mhm.
we have gotten to a point where the black white wealth gap is huge. I mean, some places it's $5 versus 300,000 in New Jersey. The average white family average net worth is over $300,000, and the average African American family is around $11,000. So I mean, we will never be able to make up that gap unless we get the reparations. So, and direct payments, because those direct payments will get us to where we need to be.
I'm just going to jump in really quickly and say that if it is financial based, it should be tax free, state and federally tax free.
Mhm.
That one.
So, Rick,
I agree.
or Bertha, would y'all want to respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that if you can come up with emergency action around COVID for national program, you're able to come up with an emergency action around reparations.
That's
And
right.
Rick mentioned before, it's a fraction of our federal budget. So, and that's that's only, not to reiterate that word, a fraction of the damage that it inflicted upon us. That we, that should be a starting point, in other words. And I want to just reemphasize that as we examine the relationship that we have as descendants of formerly enslaved ancestors with each institution in this country, we are the backbones of each of those institutions, including our banking system, our government, any institution, the basis for which our economy rather, is basically based on what we contributed to our, to the foundation of, or the financial backbone of this country. I don't think that it's rocket science to come up with a number that makes sense. At the close of the Civil War, you consider that over almost 4 million people, enslaved people in the United States, we have direct descendants accounting for about 50 million Black residents in this country. It's basic math to consider what that would look like. Certainly tax-free, certainly unequivocal. But I really want to go back to something that the way you framed this conversation earlier about who's doing the defining, about what defining the problem. I think we will get sidetracked. And this concerns me tremendously because it is a distraction about who defines who a descendant is. That will become a distraction. And it worries me if should we get to that point where it is, like, let's say, futurescaping and understanding what a federal program would look like, is splitting hairs about, okay, who can actually account for being a descendant? Who can take credit, if you will, for the contributions that our enslaved ancestors made? Is it by convenience? Is it opportunistic? And that's something that that concerns me in this conversation.
And Rick, what are your thoughts?
I take a slightly different approach, and as much as Evelyn and I are good friends and love her dearly, I respectfully disagree with her. I don't think it should be direct cash payments. I want to go back to the 1705 slave codes. We were denied the right to own property. We were denied the right to an education. And all those things we were denied, we should be given a cash voucher. And if that cash voucher is $5 million or $1 million or $500,000, whatever that is, we should take those vouchers and be able to put down a payment, full cost of a house. Take that voucher and pay for our kids' college education. Take that voucher and put our kids in private school at the elementary, middle, and high school level. All of those things that build institutional wealth and legacy, that's how the money should be distributed. The very reasons we were denied those things is so we wouldn't have legacy wealth. So those vouchers should be provided to provide the legacy wealth that we were denied. I'm not talking about a down payment on a house. Pay for the house. I'm not talking about partial payment with grants and student loans for a kid to go to college. Pay for the college tuition. That's how it should be done to build institutional wealth and legacies that can be passed from generation to generation. Because the moment we're given checks or cash, you know the vultures are going to be out there and do everything they can to strip that money from the individuals. So we're right back where we are because that's what the intent will be. We know it. We see what happens to those that win millions and millions of dollars in lottery funds, and within a year, 18 months, 24 months, it's wiped out. We have to design a system that permanently builds institutional and legacy wealth. And cash payments, I'm afraid, won't do it because there are those out there that will take advantage of the system and of our people.
Well, I mean, here's the thing with that, though. If you give as much as I understand what you're saying, you're also controlling what they spend it on. So then what's the difference in still having a control over something? If, what's the difference? Because you're still controlling them. I understand what you're saying. I really do, and I get all of that. But my whole thing is, as far as reparations for me, my issue with reparations, I want it. I think we should receive it. But the problem comes if we do the vouchers that you're saying, who in my family is going to get that voucher? My mom is one of 14 kids. And because she's one of 14, only she and her sister is alive. So, do each one of them get a $5 million voucher? And then do they then take care of stuff? And what about their other siblings' children? What happens to them? What happens to those families that's then getting that? Who gets that money? Because I've already proven my family's lineage to enslaved people. I have like 10 or 15. So how many times are we getting that $5 million for each individual enslaved person? That's where their issues come in. To be very honest, they should have just gave us that 40 acres and a mule at the beginning, and they wouldn't have had these problems from at now. They really, and that's my overall thought on that. Because then you've paid us like you've paid the Japanese, like you've paid the, other people without, in this time period, as far as paying out your reparations. But as I go through the different comments that are up here, everybody is saying, no, do it this way, no, do it that way. When in actuality, who's going to get it? To be very honest with you, what family is it? Who is it? One person? Is it every individual? My grandparents had 400 descendants in 1996. You gonna give 400 people $5 million? That's just one family. So that's where the question, or that's where it comes in. The vouchers become controlling, and then who gets it?
To answer your question,
I was going to say, don't we have models that we can refer to? The Jewish people got that were turned away from coming into New York. That's the reason why the United States paid reparations to Jewish people. What was the framework for Japanese people to get reparations? I honestly don't know what it was like if the Chinese ever got reparations for what they had to go through. Things work differently than Native Americans, but I'm thinking rather than reinvent the wheel, look at the wheel that was already built to see where we could actually make it better.
40 acres a mule is something we always refer back to, and respectfully, we should have gotten our 40 acres and a mule. I don't dispute that. But we do know that when our ancestor went to the grain yard to get food for that mule, he would have been charged twice as much as everybody else.
Right.
And we know 2 or 3 years later, the tax man would have been knocking on the door saying you didn't pay your taxes and steal the land, so we got a dead mule and no land. So we got to be careful of the conversation. And who should be getting it? Each and every one of us should be getting it. And there's a formula that should be put out there. And that formula should have equity built into it. So it shouldn't just be a parent and not the children. It shouldn't be the grandchildren and not just the grandparent. If you are of African ancestry and you look like a black person, so when you go into the department store and they're following you automatically so they know who looks black and who doesn't look black, that's who should be given it based on a formula. So that 40-acre mule, that's important. But we know what's going to happen, and the government's going to take it as easy as they can because they're going to put something in place that, and Brian said it correctly, it should not be taxable because they tax the land. And so many of our ancestors lost land in the South because they were waiting behind the back door to take that land and steal it from them.
Mm-hmm.
And when he took his tobacco to the farm, his tobacco was undervalued compared to everyone else's, so he would lose his land. So we have to be very, very careful about this.
Now,
And
taking
again, I
up
don't want to get in a conversation about does my grandmother get more than I do, and I don't get anything because my grandmother. No. There's smart people out there that can figure this out, so there's equity built into the process. I'm sorry.
So I'm taking it just a little further than what Rick said. I guess I've always thought of it in two different strands. So there's the individual reparations, which I think could be You select one or two of options, whether it's financial, land, business support, startup grants, something like that. That's probably the longer conversation. There's things that the federal government could do tomorrow if they had the will and the cojones to do it that would actually be reparations for a people. And that's things like getting rid of legacy admissions at universities, getting rid
True.
of and getting rid of university endowment system, which creates a legacy system into universities. Environmental reparations. Think about all of those old Black founded towns and townships that still exist to this day that were basically built on marginalized land because that was the only land that white people were willing to sell to them. They now are full, basically toxic wastelands. Basically, looking at places like Flint, what was done to Flint on purpose. There was no
Right.
accident about that. That's reparations. Another one would be fixing the broken social justice system. These are all things, those big, overarching things the federal government could do tomorrow. Could start work on that tomorrow.
Absolutely.
It's true.
No,
Absolutely.
I agree with that, and that I definitely agree with.
Mhm.
I'm just so excited that you guys have joined us on this show, but we're like less than 10 minutes out, and I hate that.
You did it to me again.
I know, right? I know, but the one thing that I really wanted to get in on just very quickly, and if y'all could like sum it up, because one thing that I'm gonna go back because one person said up here, and if we don't acknowledge him, Mr. Anderson, he might say something. So Mr. Anderson pointed out that the difference between um, slavery for American slavery and slavery for British slavery, 1619 to 1775 was British, 1776 and up is us. And according to the blueprint that I now call Dr. McDowell, she also said the same thing. It's 1776 and up that we should do that. Just briefly, do you agree with that?
No.
Okay.
And I'll explain why. Two-thirds of our ancestors were here at that point in time. So to say 1776, I think that's a definition that intentionally cuts off all of those ancestors who were beforehand. And we have to remember those 1705 slave codes, black women had to pay taxes just like the black husbands paid taxes. White women did not pay taxes, which meant there was a double taxation on the black family, and it was a taxation specifically denied that allowed the black family to move forward and to gain wealth. So the dates to me are really irrelevant. It's really important that we deal with the totality of the issue, that these laws were explicitly designed to take wealth away from us and deny us wealth. So to say whether it's 1865 or 1866 or 1916 or 1960 Jim Crow, whatever the case may be, look at the law, see what the laws were that denied us the ability to build legacy wealth, and that's where you stop.
I agree.
Bertha?
Yeah, no, I just I'm thinking in what Rick is saying, and I think one of the things that I'm looking at the comments as well at, don't leave us out. It's important for us to also keep in mind our engagement with institutions and how those institutions, the foundation that was laid to build those institutions. And so as we as descendants, the EC very much, I think, maybe unlike some of the other organizations, is not a lineage organization. We see genealogy being an important tool, research tool, to advance our mission, but being part of a descendant movement really is how are we engaging with the institutions that enslaved us. And so, one of the important examples that we see for historic preservation or cultural institutions like Montpelier, where we're looking at how there's parity amongst the descendants of those institutions that were enslaved, or the enslaved ancestors from those institutions, I think it's important for them to also engage in some of the decisions that are being made and how our legacies have been represented, but also how we are engaging with, the contributions that we've made for building those institutions, and namely the Constitution, an example of Montpelier. So,
I want to reiterate too. I agree. I agree 100% with everything everybody's saying about how we really have a claim going back. Like I said originally, 18 until the 1500s. I mean, like Bertha said about how the even the Spanish one of the first people to land in this on this space that we call America, United States of America, and enslave and brought enslaved people with them and continue to enslave people. However, from a legal standpoint, is what is the best what's the best way to present our case in a way that for sure, not for sure, but we can increase the chances of getting our reparations. And so the 40 acres and a mule is where I land.
Well, I want to thank you guys so much for being on the show. Brian, do you have anything to say real quick?
Just big thank you to our guests. Thoroughly loved having all of you. Thank you for just sharing your viewpoints.
Definitely, definitely. You guys are just
Thanks for
probably,
having us.
yes, you guys are probably just the brainiacs of the world, and everybody don't know it. But the thing that I really want to say is that we all have our brainiac times, because when I say the comments that have been popping up have been exquisite, they've just been just phenomenal.
Mhm.
Kudos to the groups that's watching us, that have been able to like really put their own opinions out there. We are so glad that you were able to follow this show and be on this show along with us. Kudos to you. So I'm giving a whole clap to you guys as well. I'm sorry for certain some of the comments didn't come up because Dr. Shelley was laying y'all out and I couldn't put them. She was trying to get
Hey,
some questions up there
hey,
and they
Shelly.
just wouldn't show up. So,
Yes.
but yes, I do want to thank you guys for coming. Next week we start our Women's History Month. And with Women's History Month, and I left the book in the back, we're talking to Brian will not be with us today. I do hope to get another guest, another co-host on the show. But if not, it may be just me. So I want y'all to bear with me and work with me on this. Shelly, you want to do it anyway? No, but seriously, next week we will be talking with Myrna Heath. Myrna Heath wrote the book about equal justice and how black women actually in history and what they did to help move us along as far as justice was concerned. So, with that being said, I want to thank you again for joining us and being on the show with us, ladies and gentlemen. And I want to thank everybody for actually just watching and tuning in. And questions will be answered, will get answered. Bertha, Evelyn, Rick, thank you so much.
Thank you.
you.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you for everyone who's tuned in and shared the last hour with us. It's always appreciated. As Donia said, I will be flying back from Roots Tech. So I will not be with you. I will be with you in spirit. So enjoy next week's show. And until then, I'm Brian Sheffy.
And I'm Donya Williams. Thank you so much for joining us, you guys. Ladies, gents, please stay on with us for a moment. Bye.
Bye bye.